When it comes to me and the Zelda series, I'm what the kids call a prehistoric gamer. I like the older 3D Zelda games over the new ones. Now don't get me wrong, I thought Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were amazing in their own right, just not my preferred style of Zelda. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are my two favorite Zelda games. Well, technically the 3DS remakes, so I guess I'm more of a retro gamer. And that's because I prefer the linear structure over the open-ended. And one of my biggest reasons as to why is with the dungeons. Most of these are designed with such careful calculations and condensed puzzle solving, and it's something that the new games, well, at least they tried. I love everything from the visual and musical ambience, the clever mechanism-based puzzles and gimmicks, and just the feeling you get throughout the process of figuring out the lay of the land, slowly learning how everything connects. It's such a great test of both your combat and puzzle-solving skills, and frankly, it makes the game design major in me geek out. And so I'd like to dissect each of these dungeons to further show why I love them so much. They're not all winners, however, so I'd also like to get into why some of these fumble the bag. Now, I originally planned to just do the Ocarina of Time dungeons, but I figured, why not, let's throw in the Majora's Mask dungeons too, since there's only 4 in that game and that would make for a lame separate video. So we're working with 12 dungeons in total. Also, yeah, no mini dungeons like the Ice Cavern because I just didn't feel like it. I don't see Ganon's Tower as a traditional dungeon either, more of a final gauntlet. Also, we're judging them by the original N64 versions, not the 3DS remakes, but I will note if they make any significant changes. Now, I'm definitely going to be a lot more of a nerdy game design goof this time around, so once we get started, just know what you're signing up for. Let's see which dungeons are the peakest of the peak, and let's pretend to be surprised that the water temple is at the bottom. You know, I'm disappointed. I wanted to be the guy who didn't fit in and say that Jabu Jabu's belly is worse and that the water temple isn't that bad, but that was just based on my memory from playing them before. Upon replay of the water temple, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to put on the Zelda shirt and cargo shorts for this one, because yeah, it's not the worst level in gaming history, but it's not good either, at all. Let's get the positives up front though. For one, I think it looks gorgeous. The Eastern-inspired architecture with the dragon statues and building in the center room pair really nicely with the water. The music is great too, with the rippling sounds and the guitar. The Dark Link mini-boss is staged really well, even if the fight itself is frustrating to beat without cheesing with certain items. It also... oh no, that was it. Time for all the bad. Let's get this out of the way. Yes, going into the menu every time you need to equip and unequip the iron boots to sink or float is frankly not the most seamless gameplay you ever feel. There's so many parts where you just equip the boots to sink into a corridor, only to unequip to ascend at the end of that corridor. You know it's bad when you make something as simple as going through hallways a drag, but trust me, the boots are the least of the water temple's troubles. The worst of it is just how sloppy the flow is, and it's the water temple for Christ's sake. So there's these Triforce emblems where if you play the lullaby in front of it, the water level will change, opening up certain paths while blocking some others. Sounds like a cool mechanic. So why do I look like this the whole time? Each of the emblems that take the water to a certain level are in completely separate and tucked away locations. And you can't use the ocarina underwater, so you can't use the one that sets the level to medium until you set it to low first. So I hope you like going back to each of these and rushing through the same rooms over and over. It's really fun. So every dungeon has this center room that branches out to different paths. Only one is open from the get-go, and the other passages open up as you progress. The water temple, however, has like 12 different passages. It's not bad at first. The game leads you to a specific path where Ruto introduces you to the water level mechanic, but once you find out where all the Triforce emblems are, it just turns into fucking around and finding out. There's nothing wrong with a very open-ended dungeon, it's just that exploring said dungeon is a slog. The likely first-time player experience is that you're going to try to explore one of these passages, which may or may not involve pausing the game and equipping the iron boots, and then after a while, pausing the game again and unequipping the iron boots, only to find out you can't do this yet from not having a key or the upgraded hookshot. So you head back to the main room, which may or may not involve pausing the game, equipping the iron boots, and then eventually pausing the game again and equipping the iron boots again. And the cycle repeats until you stumble upon where you're actually supposed to be. And it gets worse with the fact that the water temple just doesn't know what to do with all these keys. There's a locked door whenever, and there's a chest with a key whenever. And they could possibly be on completely different parts of the temple. It also does what some other Ocarina of Time dungeons do, which is having a locked door only to have another locked door. I don't like it when they do this because a player with one key will think they can progress, only to find out, there was this one part where I got super deep into one of these passages and I was actually getting pretty invested with quickly swimming to a ledge before the water lowered and getting behind all these boulders. I went through all of that excitement, only to find this. I'm not saying the dungeon should always spell out where to go next, with like a big arrow over my head at all times. In fact, what makes these dungeons so masterfully designed is how subtly they point you in the right direction. I'm just saying they shouldn't give you this many options from the get-go if you're not supposed to progress through most of them yet. All of this just makes the dungeon's critical path a mess, where I don't think I'll ever clear this dungeon seamlessly without missing any steps. And even if I did, it still wouldn't be all that more enjoyable with how sluggish progression feels. All I have left to say aren't nice things either. I think it's kinda lame that the dungeon item is just Hookshot Part 2, and the fight with Morpha is fine, I guess. The puzzles are also decent, I suppose. None of them really stood out to me though. The 3DS version does make a lot of improvements with all its visual cues and being able to assign the boots to a button, but at the end of the day, I think it still would have ranked at the bottom since this and one other dungeon are the only ones I flat out don't like. So yeah, unfortunately, the 2010 Zelda YouTubers might have had a point with the Water Temple, even if the hate's a bit overblown. Easily the runner-up for the worst is inside Lord Jabu Jabu's belly. First of all, the name sucks so much I'm just gonna call it this dungeon for now on. Second of all, ew! One of my least favorite themes you can give to a level is the insides of someone's body. It's creative, I suppose, I just don't fuck with it at all. It's gross. So yeah, you could imagine I'm not too fond of this dungeon's aesthetic, and the dated graphics sure don't make it any more appealing. Your objective is to help Gerudo find the Zora's Sapphire. Not a fan, to be honest. She's always yapping about politics or something, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention, and she scolds me for leaving her even though her job is to wait on the fucking button. If you lose her, you have to go all the way back to her spawn point, which can happen if you have her touch water. Oh shit, my bad, I drowned the fish. There's also a part where you have to keep her on a button to enter a room, but once you head back out, she just fucking left. I'm starting to think that's not a coincidence that you're involved in the two worst dungeons in this game. Did you make this? But as for how the dungeon itself is designed, it's a mixed bag. You have to defeat these flesh things with the newly acquired boomerang to take down barriers. The problem is that the sequence takes place in these splitting hallways where every hallway looks exactly the same. Therefore, I find it a bit hard to locate the newly opened path, but I do think it's smart to foreshadow the sequence by having one of the barriers present in the main room. It helps naturally point you in the right direction once the sequence is over. There's also another bit that I like near the end, where you're at a higher point of an earlier room and you lower a platform that connects two separate sections. I find the enemies in this dungeon to be pretty forgettable and faceless, such as the iconic jellyfish and bubble.obj. The big Octorok mini-boss sucks. It's either you run around in a circle behind him for a century or you just cheese it. However, it does end on a high note with Baronade, a fun and fast-paced boss where it's constantly trying to zap you and so you have to keep moving. This is when they really drill into your head that you have to use Z-targeting. This used to be my least favorite just from being unappealing and forgettable, but hey, at least I could remotely get anywhere without having to switch my Jordans. And there were a couple of solid moments, so you know what, this dungeon, you weren't as bad as you could be. Despite being only 3 dungeons in, we've already reached just okay territory, because the Fire Temple is just okay. I like how it's more action focused. You'll be skipping across lava, evading boulders, and even some doors are on that revenge block. You really get the feeling that the temple wants you dead, and really sells the danger of the inside of a volcano. But I'm not gonna lie, at times it does get a bit carried away, like running from boulders, plus maneuvering around firewall traps, plus these cube towers that breathe fire. Like, Jesus, calm down. A better example is with this firewall you have to run from, and on the second visit you're supposed to find a way to get behind it and enter a door. I think it's just the right amount of treachery, and with a bit of spatial puzzle solving on the side. The dungeon item, the Megaton Hammer, sure, is an item. It can break specific rocks, hit rusty switches, and it's pretty powerful in combat. But like, I don't think this is ever used after the Fire Temple aside from like one bit in Ganon's Tower. I do like how the goal is to free the Gorons from their prison cells, mostly because the happy music that plays as they roam free is really goofy to me. But inside each of these cells is a key, and this is when things get messy. While not as bad as the Water Temple, I still find the Fire Temple to be too excessive with its keys. Like, I know you want me to free all the Gorons, but it once again leads to my pet peeve of a locked door taking you to another locked door almost immediately. But ultimately, if your primary focus is saving the Gorons, you're not going to run into this problem. It just sucks that you can. The Fire Temple on occasion does plan out the critical path in creative ways. You have to whack this platform with the hammer and it drops you all the way back down to the room of the boss door. But since you don't have the boss key yet, you'll naturally head back to the entrance room, and you'll notice you can take out these pillars with the hammer, opening up a new path to the boss key, and from there, the boss door is just in the other room. I find it really cool how one of the last rooms you visit is tucked away away in the very first room. It makes perfect sense why they have the boss door at the very beginning. Honestly, the most interesting part of the Fire Temple to me is its history of the music. At this point, this fun fact is probably on the same level as, did you know Mario 2 is a reskin of Urban Champion? But I still think it's interesting. Early copies of Ocarina of Time had some real-world religious stuff in it that got removed in later versions since they realized a bit too soon that it goes against their policies. Most infamous being the Fire Temple theme, where they sampled Islamic chanting. Koji Kondo didn't know it was Islamic, he just thought it sounded cool, but once he found out, he was like, I made a mistake. So later versions replaced it with the synth choir from the game's sound font. And I don't know about you guys, but the original chanting version sounds a bit unsettling, and I kinda like it. Just the way they're compressed and slowly fade into the track really hits different when you're going out on a night walk. But yeah, it was a smart decision to replace it to prevent controversy. Anyways, thanks for listening to the gaming trivia you probably already knew. So yeah, the Fire Temple was going for a lot of interesting stuff. I just don't think all these ideas stuck the landing. Ranking third to the bottom sounds pretty harsh because it's not bad at all. We're just working with a pretty high bar. Now onto the weakest dungeon of Majora's Mask. Even though there's a measly 4 dungeons, I don't think any of them are a miss. But if I were to choose the one to throw under the bus, I think it's easily Woodfall Temple. What I really like about the Majora's Mask dungeons is that they're designed around being jungle gyms for each of the transformation masks. And to Woodfall's credit, it does so pretty well with the Deku form. You can't swim in the water because it's toxic, it often plays CSGO, so you have to skip across it with Deku Link, as well as using the Deku flowers to fly around. Even though it does what it's trying to do very well, I just find that the Deku's abilities are easily the least interesting of the 3. Therefore, the dungeon that's built around his abilities are the least interesting to me. I do find Woodfall to be an effective pseudo-tutorial dungeon. It's on the easier side, but still tougher than the Deku Tree since the game assumes you already have the experience from Ocarina of Time. You can also see this with them reintroducing the bow, where it quickly has you do more complicated bow and arrow puzzles. There's this cool sequence once the flower platform starts spinning, and there's a lit torch in the middle, so you have to align your arrow to shoot through the flame and into a distant torch. I really like that puzzle, it's so cool. And I also like how they added some tension with the torch lighting puzzles by having evil moths chase you. They're low-key kinda scary. We wrap things up with the boss fight with Adalwa. While I think most of the bosses got greatly improved on the 3DS, I actually like the original Adalwa fight more. You can pretty much beat him however you want. You can simply go sword on sword, stun him with the bow, use the surrounding bomb flowers, firebomb him with the Deku flowers. Anything's fair game, really. I just love how the fight encourages you to come up with your own strategy, and the 3DS version having it where you have to use a Deku flower is a bit lame in comparison. I don't really have much gripes with Woodfall, to be honest. It's just that I don't find the mechanic it centers around to be as engaging. Okay, there's one gripe. The music is really fucking annoying. With one exception, the dungeon music in Majora's Mask isn't really that special, but Woodfall's the only one I'm actively not having a fun time listening to. It goes so hard on 0% volume. Woodfall Temple is a solid dungeon, and the fact that it's down at number 9 should be a testament that we're working with some real good stuff.
Okay, here it is, Mr. Krabs.
So you might be confused, straight up flabbergasted, that I have the easy peasy babies first dungeons relatively high. Well, I don't think a dungeon being more complex automatically makes it better, and I'm judging these by how well they accomplish their own specific goals. And in the case of the Dongo's Cavern, it perfectly fits the bill of being the second dungeon in Ocarina of Time, upping the difficulty and scale from the Deku Tree just the right amount. For one, it's a far spookier atmosphere than the Deku Tree, with creepier ambience and scarier enemy designs. Like, what were they cooking with Beamos? The enemies are generally a lot tougher. You got the Dongos that take a few hits to get down and even self-destruct. And the lizard guys are good at teaching you to avoid brute force. You gotta go for the attack and then pull up your defenses once they jump behind you. Actually pay some fucking attention. Not to mention, they just look really funny. But I think what really sold me on this dungeon is how it handles the bomb mechanic. My god, does this need to be taught to generations. So at first, you can only blow stuff up using these bomb flowers, which you can't collect in your inventory, you just pick them up and throw them on the spot. They infinitely respawn too, so you can attempt to throw as many times as you need. And throughout the dungeon, they use the bomb flowers in increasingly more creative ways. You'll be using them to defeat moving targets, and learn that you can blow one up next to other bombs to start a chain reaction. And at this point, the game knows how comfortable you've become with this mechanic, so then it gives you bombs as a consumable resource, and can now use them whenever you want. Not only does this give the player more free range, it also gives them more responsibility to figure out when and where to use them on their own. And that, my friends, is possibly one of the best ways I've ever seen any game develop a mechanic. The game designer's writing was fire. I might be making the Dongo's Cavern sound like peak fiction, but honestly, I don't think it's that fun. Everything to do with the bombs is designed perfectly, but everything else is meh. King Dodongo is a good boss, albeit quickly repetitive. And there are some enemies that are more annoying than compelling, like the baby Dodongos that just spawn in and explode immediately, or these stupid fire keys that creep into the camera and you barely have any time to react to them. Lots of these residents have some primal hater energy and I don't like it. But at the end of the day, Dodongo's Cavern accomplished its main goal, really getting the message across to the player that, hey, you ain't in the whimsical pixie forest anymore. You're in the big boys territory now. If Woodfall Temple was a good obstacle course for Deku Link, Snowhead provides a great obstacle course for Goron Link. He thrives in this dungeon, using his Goron roll to fly off ramps. They have a really good tutorial room where you can practice lining up the jump, and if you fall off, you land in the lava, and shows you that Goron Link is built different. I hope you didn't have too much trouble making that one jump, or else you're gonna walk into that main room and fall to your knees Walter White style. Yeah, what's going to make or break your enjoyment of Snowhead is how good you are at the Goron roll. If you are, this is fun and exhilarating. If not, this is your personal hell. It definitely has the steepest learning curve out of any of these dungeons. It's honestly not that hard to pull off these jumps, just make sure you're lined up properly and don't rotate the stick while the spikes are out. The 3DS remake thankfully makes the rolls easier to manage since turning is much less sharp and you go slower in the build-up. You could say it's a good quality of life improvement, but no. Majora's Mask 3D is a bad remake. Snowhead is an ice-themed dungeon with various frozen obstacles, so naturally the item you get halfway through are the fire arrows. Once you get them, it creates a lot of shortcuts and prevents you from having to redo puzzles. So if you do fail a jump and fall way down, it'll be pretty easy to climb back up. To be honest, I sometimes forget about the part where the pillar rises in the middle because it just sort of happens. You punch segments of the pillar to lower the top of it and access the boss door, and I guess that's pretty cool, but I don't know, it's just kind of a thing you quickly do when it's done. It would have been more impactful if the pillar was present for more of the dungeon, because as it is, you just create a problem and then the solution almost immediately. I'm just nitpicking since I don't have any significant complaints about Snowhead, so here's more nitpicks. Some of these stray fairy locations lean toward bullshit, but hey, that's the price we pay for double magic meters. Both mini-bosses are Wizrobe, and I wish I was joking, but this is just 2 of the 5 Wizrobe fights in this game, and giving me the boss key at the same time the boss door is accessible is a bit redundant to me. At least the boss itself, Goat, yes his name is Goat spelled differently, is pretty fun, chasing him down with the Goron roll as things get progressively more chaotic. A fun conclusion to a dungeon that, while I have a handful of issues with, didn't really add up to something big. I could see this being a nightmare to a first time player from not getting a grip on the dated controls, but I'm afraid I'll have to say it. Skill issue. Yeah, that's right, I'm gatekeeping this kid's game. I am a Nintendo fan after all.
Yes, we're gonna cut this through and put a name on it.
Yes, I know. Inside the Great Deku Tree is an easy as hell, short as hell tutorial dungeon, but damn it, it succeeds at being one masterfully. Like genuinely, this might be one of the greatest tutorial levels in any game. It teaches you so many basics in such natural and seamless ways. The Deku Babas are combat training, the Skulltulas on the vines let you know that you won't always have a solution when you see a problem and have to come back to it when you do. The Deku Scrubs make use of the shield. The room with the slingshot not only shows you what the slingshot can do, but also informs you that you need to be aware of your surroundings. It also teaches you about Deku Stick and Torch puzzles, swimming and diving, block pushing, paying attention to dialogue by having a Deku Scrub tell you a code. It lets you know that sometimes you gotta be bold, and you have to jump all the way down from the top floor onto the spider web and into the water, which at the same time tells you that water can prevent fall damage, and all of this is taught to the player in like 20 minutes. It's fantastic, and Goma is a solid first boss battle. The atmosphere is gloomy, and the eye being the brightest part of her perfectly telegraphs that's her weak point. My favorite part has to be when you loop back to an elevated section of a previous room and push a block down not only to create a shortcut, but also carry fire from a torch in an earlier puzzle to solve a new one with the shortcut you just made. I know these are all baby puzzles, like putting shapes into holes, but they're very clever and very well executed baby puzzles. The first level of a game always has to be the easiest, so I'm not judging the Deku Tree by its complexity, but rather how well it serves as a training ground, and I think I've made it clear how effectively it does that. That being said though, I can't put it that high, since I think these top slots should go to dungeons that not only perfectly accomplish what they're going for, but aren't restrained by having daycare duty.
You know what that means? Fish!
The developers behind Majora's Mask really said, let's make the water temple but actually fun and not comically time consuming. Now I remember not liking Great Bay Temple at first. I think it was literally just because water, but the more I replayed it, the more I thoroughly enjoyed it, mostly because I actually knew what I was doing. There's a lot of parallels to the water temple with well, you know, water, but also that the central room leads to several passages. But rather than the focus being the water level, it's the water flow. The water flowing through pipes is responsible for powering water geysers that allow you to get to new places. So the goal is to trace down the pipes to different rooms, where you then connect two parts of the pipe with a switch. The end of one pipe eventually leads you to start flowing water through another, until the last pipe powers a water geyser to the boss room. Man, I love this mechanic so much. Following the water flow inside the pipes is such a natural way to guide you in a dungeon where it's easy to get lost in. And even when the tube leads you back to a previous room, that's when the game hints to you that there's something new to be done there. Like this one room leads to a mini boss room you can only get to with ice arrows, but shortly after getting the ice arrow, the pipe you're following passes by that room again, giving you the opportunity to get to that mini boss room. I swear there is no cooler feeling than analyzing a game and realizing that such a subtle detail had an important purpose. Once again, writing is fire. Great Bay Temple also looks really unique from a normal temple. While the rest have a more ancient aesthetic, this one's more steampunk, and I really like the tiny detail of water dripping from pipes.
Welcome to the year 2077.
This also serves as a perfect playground for Zora Link, for obvious reasons. But as far as my criticisms go, I don't really like underwater combat, and the bosses are nothing to write home about. The boss fight where you fight Gecko with all those slimes is okay, I guess. Wart just takes forever and lags the shit out of some versions of the game. And Georg is a fish. And I will say, sometimes Zora Link's fast swimming feels like it's working against me when I need to swim more precisely. The 3DS remake fixes this by having swimming initially slower and can go faster with magic. While tying such a fun movement to consume magic is a bit of a bummer, I think you can easily adapt to the change, and it allows you to go at different speeds for different situations. But no! Majora's Mask 3D is a bad remake.
Nope, you are nitpicking and biased. I win, bye-bye.
Hey nerd, I'm your younger self. Wanna play some E.T.?
Fuck no!
I don't think there could have been a better way to cap off Ocarina of Time's dungeons than with the Spirit Temple. The premise of playing the first half as a child, then the second half as an adult is perfect. The contrast between how it was and how it's going. And I love how they don't hold back with the danger while you're a child. It doesn't care that all you have are dinky ass tools. It'll throw Stalfos at you anyways. It also demonstrates how much you've grown over your journey, overcoming monsters twice your size despite not being in your prime. The dungeons and Nubis enemies are pretty cool, how they mirror your positions, so you have to line them up over the fire. I also find it interesting that there's an ongoing narrative throughout the dungeon. Naburu asked you to retrieve some silver gauntlets as a child, only for her to get kidnapped and you gotta save her by wearing those gauntlets as an adult to further explore the temple. She doesn't have the same impact as the other sages to me, since you only just meet her around the same time she's revealed to be a sage. But at least she actually does some stuff instead of just vibe until you stumble upon them. And speaking of the silver gauntlets, they're kinda lame. I don't really feel that strong wearing them. And you get the golden gauntlets like an hour later that allow you to do much cooler shit. If they scrap their golden gauntlets and give the silver super strength, that would have fixed everything. And if the Spirit Temple was already great, imagine if it had parts where you chuck pillars at stuff. Ah well, you also get the mirror shield here, an actually interesting item that opens up some cool light reflection puzzles. All the bite-sized puzzles are pretty good in general. Being the last temple from Ganon's castle, they hold nothing back and aren't afraid to leave you bedazzled. I like the theme of this temple a lot. The music this time around is less ambient and has more of a melody, which is why it's my favorite theme aside from one we haven't gone over yet. As cool as the concept of switching between the two timelines is, I can't help but feel there was some missed opportunities, because other than that central room with the statue, the paths that the two links take don't ever converge. Maybe have Child Link explore a room where one part can only be accessible with a hookshot or the hover boots, and since Adult Link can't squeeze through the cubby in the entrance, you have to get back to that room the long way around. I don't know, to me there was some missed potential to have some cool rerouting for the second visit, but thankfully a certain dungeon from this game's sequel would deliver what I asked for. That's really just a nitpick though, and I think the fact that the premise inspired me to think of more ways to use it is a good sign of its creative potential. I can't be too upset when the Spirit Temple, as is already superb. Plus, the name of the mid-boss is Iron Nut, and I think that's pretty epic.
2, 1.
Man, in a way, Stone Tower Temple frustrates me. You were this close from being the peak of the entire series, but you slip up just enough times for you not to be. Let's get those out of the way first and foremost. As weird and freaky as the statues are, the puzzles that revolve around them are complete nothing burgers. Just stand on a switch, play the song, you win. Both the room with all the mirrors and the room with the block pushing puzzle where you constantly flip the ground aren't as fun as they should be, but the worst of it all is twin mode. My god, this boss sucks. Becoming a giant to demolish gigantic centipedes sounds cool, but it's just swinging your sword at them until the game decides they're dead. The 3DS remake thankfully improves the fight a lot by having you start the fight normal size, and then gives you the giant's mask mid-fight, and you actually use your fists instead. It's really cool. But no! Majora's okay, I'll stop. But with all of that out of the way, oh my god, I love Stone Tower Temple so much. The heights that this temple reaches are so high that even with all those complaints, it still reaches S tier status. Can we talk about how negative this place feels? The architecture consists of blocks that depict people licking Triforces on their asses, and I don't know if I even want to mention that. It's a fortress that apparently a shit ton of people died trying to conquer, so the place just reeks of defeat, and the music really sells that feeling, which, fun fact, includes an ocarina, horns, drums, and a guitar. That leads me to what I love about this temple. It's a test of all 4 transformations. There's flying with the Deku, lava to tread through with the Goron, and you have to leap out of the water with good timing with the Zora. Almost every room consists of either engaging combat or a test of one of your abilities. It really shines with the mini-bosses. Gomez is super intimidating and hits like a truck, but I like the Garo Master even more. He's got a lot of personality with his finishing monologue, and how before the fight his laugh echoes as he drops from the hole in the ceiling that totally won't be important later. After the fight, you have to follow his advice and shoot a light arrow at the red jewel in front of the temple, and doing so leads to this. Explain this, round earthers. And this is what made Stone Tower Temple an icon. The surrealness and cool factor of flipping the temple on its head and re-exploring rooms at a different angle. It's cinema. It's absolute cinema. Parts of Majora's Mask like this genuinely makes me ask, how the hell did they make this in a year? I love the structure of the upside down bit, where you're trying to get to the same room where the Garo Master was, but the route to get there is far different because of the temple's transformed layout. And this time you actually jump down from the hole in the ceiling that takes you to hell, I assume. I mean, the boss fight sure feels like hell. There's a lot of lore regarding the Stone Tower and Iconic Canyon as a whole. I don't have the time to go over it, but I encourage you to do some studying on your own time. It has a handful of problems, sure, but its concept and gameplay dynamic is so cool, it's hard for me to really care. Also, yeah, it turns out the Majora's Mask dungeons just get progressively better. That would have made a separate video even more boring, but let's see what the remaining dungeons from Ocarina of Time have to offer. And let me tell you, they're offering some amazing stuff.
I think my scary, otherworldly, shadowy spirit friends might have something to say about that.
The biggest surprise to me when replaying these dungeons is discovering how much I absolutely love the Shadow Temple. I used to not like this one at all, but now I think it's one of the greats. It was definitely because I was a kid and I was scared of it, but as an adult, I very much appreciate how comically dark it is. There's guillotines, bloodstains in earlier versions. Some rooms are literally constructed of skulls and bones, dead hands just being a thing that exists. But it was the re-deads and Gibdos that really got to me as a kid. The traumatic scream as they slowly walk towards you and you can't move at all. Whether I like it or not, that's a core memory. While the other dungeons are just titled dungeons in game design terms, this is a dungeon in the literal sense. This place was used to torture people who opposed Hyrule. You stepped out of line and the king would say, "Mods, send him to the Shadow Temple, thank you." I love how the Shadow Temple revolves around tricks and traps. You can't always trust what you see and need to use the lens of truth to see through their epic pranks. You can't always wear the lens though, since it drains magic, so it becomes a balancing act of gaining and losing the ability to see them. The paranoia of what's ahead of you further adds to the fear this temple is trying to instill on you, and so does the unique structure of the dungeon. It's super linear without any loops or backtracking, and while that does kind of take away part of what I like about the dungeon design, there's a good reason why it's like this. The point A to B progression makes it harder to leave the further you get, and adds a lot of tension with the feeling of crawling deeper into the depths with no sign of returning. And that's more apparent from the fact that the environment goes from man-made to slowly more earthy. This type of streamlined level design is the type of thing you see from a survival horror game, so I love to see it implemented in a Zelda dungeon. I fully respect this dungeon deviating from the exploration aspect, even if it's a bit of a shame that they did. As for my other notes, I like the hover boots. I just think they're neat. You could run into the same problem with taking the iron boots on and off, but unlike the iron boots, you're not entirely discouraged from keeping them on at all times. You slip around a lot while wearing them, so pretty much you can choose to keep them on for convenience at the cost of movement being a bit harder, and I'd say that's a fair trade-off. I love the spooky ghost ship sequence, and the fact that it's a one-way trip and can't go back by regular means is more of that tension-adding linear progression I was talking about. But I will say, sometimes the hazards can be a bit much, where it's just the designer slapping things together. And as for Bongo Bongo. I don't know about this one. Like, yeah, it does use the Lens of Truth and hover boots well. He's just really easy, and really shouldn't be with how late in the game he is. The Shadow Temple is very bold from both its atmosphere and level design, and I love it for that. A masterpiece that I've only recently discovered. So good, I even considered it being at number 1. But with a bit more consideration, I decided that a certain other dungeon just barely gets the edge in my opinion. And I think you all know what it is. So, funny story with me and Ocarina of Time. I actually played Majora's Mask first, and it ended up being my all-time favorite game. So playing Ocarina of Time afterwards, I was still having some fun, but definitely felt underwhelming in comparison, and wasn't feeling that it was living up to all the hype. However, I was much more intrigued when the Adult Link section of the game started. I kept going, led by curiosity, and played through the first dungeon of this timeline. And that's when it clicked. I finally understood why Ocarina of Time is so beloved to many people. What finally convinced me of that was the Forest Temple. So, it turns out the Forest Temple is one of my favorite game levels, period, but that so happens to be a popular take, so I really want to get deep into this one so it doesn't seem like I'm giving in to the mob. I think what easily sold this to many people was a surreal atmosphere, and who could blame anyone? You have this big mansion tucked away in the Lost Woods that felt like it was once heavily populated, now infested by overgrowth and inhabited by the afterlife. The light fog in the courtyards is a small touch that really adds to the mystique, and I love how the mansion's shape feels normal at first, only to go deeper where hallways get warped and the rooms get more unusual. And I've never heard anything like the Forest Temple music. The echoing bone rattle and the strange whistle sound that creeps in and out somehow feels both whimsical, mysterious, and unsettling at the same time. Koji really knocked it out of the park with this one. That's right, he and I are on a first name basis. The boss fight with Phantom Ganon really puts a cap on the surrealness, fighting a figure we didn't think we'd see so soon. Also, you play tennis with him and that's kind of awesome. The dungeon layout itself is, for the most part, masterfully constructed. Your goal is given to you at the start. Hunt down the 4 ghosts that stole each of the torch flames to access the elevator. The hunt is honestly more fun than actually fighting them, since it's just you waiting for that window to do a jump slash. The difficulty here comes from trying not to doze off. The routing takes form of many loops where it eventually takes you back to the central hub, and from there you can access another route from what you've gathered in a loop you just went through. And whenever they choose to deviate from the linear path, it's done so in a pretty clever way. For instance, you'll stumble upon a room where the red ghost is hiding in paintings. Seeing as you can't do anything, you just proceed to the next room, where after defeating a mob of Stalfos, you get the bow and arrow. The room after is the same room as before but with the blue ghost, but here you'll think to use the item you just got to catch the ghost. And once you do, you'll naturally go back to the red ghost and do the same. And since you're already back here, you can revisit that twisty room, shoot the eye, and reshape the room where you can get the boss key. You see that even when there's backtracking, it feels a lot more natural than tedious. Note how I said for the most part, however, because when it comes to the keys, what happened here? You can get 3 keys before even having to open one locked door. Not to mention that there's once again a lock right in front of another lock, and one of the keys is hiding over a tree in the entrance, which a lot of people will miss. So like, what's the point? Yeah, I can't defend the Forest Temple's chronic key addiction, but I will come to the defense of another possible criticism. Some may find the Forest Temple a drastic difficulty jump from the previous dungeon, and they be right. Like, I agree. You never had to worry about keys, the enemies are far tougher, and the puzzles are a lot more complicated, so I can kinda understand if that's what put you off. But honestly, I think the difficulty spike is actually one of the strongest parts about the Forest Temple. Think about it. In a way, the dungeon design drastically matured, and so did you. There could have been smoother steps to get to this point, but tragically, you couldn't be there. You had to be cryogenically frozen for 7 years, so you had to get suddenly dropped off in the big leagues. I might be reaching just a bit, but I think the Forest Temple intentionally wanted to put you way out of your comfort zone, to have you feel the sudden shift in your surroundings that Link felt. It wants you to feel like a fish out of water. It wants you to get lost, to get beaten senseless by every able-bodied patron in the temple. You won't feel like you're ready for this at all, but you have no choice. You have to punch above your weight class whether you like it or not. The Forest Temple makes you feel the sudden jump in maturity that Link must have felt jumping from a kid to a grown-up, and from how strong of a narrative and emotional beat this dungeon is in the game, I think I can easily gloss past some of the issues I may have with it. The Forest Temple is just too damn powerful, design-wise but especially narrative-wise. It was a close first place. I did consider going for the Shadow Temple instead, but while I do like how much it deviates from the archetypes, I think the Forest Temple is just a better representative of the golden era of Zelda dungeons. And its legendary high points like these are why I still love Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask to this very day. The 3DS remakes, I mean. The N64 versions are just pretty good. But that's just my silly ramblings. If you made it this far, let me know what your favorite dungeon is, or let me know why I suck at the Water Temple. And since I'm already here, I might as well tend to my favorite pastime, making fun of Link's nose.
Why your nose so fucking big? Big ass nose.
Funny guy! Right here!